Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's business studies lesson. My name is Simphiwe Mukwena. This lesson is brought to you by Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Sci-Bono, Discovery Center, and broadcast by Pagama Research and Development. Grade 12, we are going to look at the first topic of your work for paper 1. We will look at the impact of recent legislation on business. Now, at the end of this lesson, I would want you to be able to discuss, if not discuss, describe, if not describe, the purposes of 8 acts. So I will show you which acts are prescribed for your syllabus in grade 12. Now that you are able to discuss the purpose of the 8 acts, then you must be able to discuss. If not discuss, you must also be able to explain. If not explain, you must be able to evaluate. What is that you are evaluating? You are evaluating the impact of the 8 acts on businesses. What do we mean by impact? Impact refers to advantage and disadvantage of the acts on businesses. Then, when you're done with evaluating the impact of the 8 acts on businesses, you must be able to discuss. If not discuss, you must be able to explain actions which are regarded as discriminatory by the various acts that we will be looking at in this lesson. Then, when you are done discussing the discriminatory action, you must be able to outline. If not outline, you must be able to explain, discuss the penalties for non-compliance with the various acts. Now, when I'm talking about the various acts, I'm talking about the 8 acts that I will show you as the lesson goes on. Now, grade 12 learners, these are the action verbs that you need to know, because when you are asked a question on the purpose of the 8 acts, you may come across the action verb that says outline. If not outline, describe. If not describe, discuss. However, the answers will be the same, but you are not going to be marked in the same way. I will show you when a question requires you to discuss, how are you going to be marked, and then when a question requires you to discuss, how are you going to be marked. Then when you're done with the action that are regarded as discriminatory by the various acts, you must then be able to explain the penalties for non-complying with the act, any of the 8 acts. Then you must also be able to outline, if not outline, the role of SITAs. Now, not all acts talk about the role of SITAs. Now, as I'm unpacking the content, I will show you when do you do the role of SITAs, when do you explain how SITAs are funded, and then when do you explain the meaning or elaborate on the meaning of learnership. It is when you do which act? It is when you do your skills development. And lastly, you must be able to explain the National Skills Development Strategy and the Human Resource Development Strategy. Now, I've said to you 8 acts that you need to know as a grade 12. Now, which are those acts? The first one is Skills Development Act, which is commonly known as SDA. And then we have Labor Relations Act, which is also known as LRA. Then we have the Employment Equity Act, which is known as EEA. Then we have the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which is known as BCEA. Then we have the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, which is known as BBEE. These are just the abbreviations of the act. These are your abbreviations of the act. Then we have Compensation for Occupation Injuries and Diseases Act, which is abbreviated as COIDA. Now, these 6 are your Labor Act, and then we have 2 Consumer Acts, that is your National Credit Act, which is abbreviated as NCA. Lastly, we have the Consumer Protection Act, which is abbreviated as CPA. Like I said to you, you need to know the 8 acts. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like I've indicated, what is that you need to know about the act? Now we're going to start with Skills Development Act. Now I will show you all the aspects that you need to cover when you do the Skills Development Act. Shall we then start with the Skills Development Act? Now, these are the aspects that you need to cover under Skills Development Act. Number 1, you need to know the purpose of Skills Development Act. You need to know the impact of Skills Development Act on businesses. By the way, I said impact in this context refers to what? Refers to the advantage and the disadvantage of the act on business, which are your positives and negatives. Action which are regarded as discriminatory. Here, discriminatory, we mean that if the employer does not apply the act according to the requirements of the act. Now, there is an element of segregation. Some employees are preferred over other employees. Now, obvious, if that happens, then their business is going to be penalized. Penalized for what? For non-compliance, for not acting according to the rules stipulated with respect to that act. Now, for businesses to avoid penalties, then they must do what? They must comply with the requirements of the 8 acts that I've mentioned. Now, we will do the ways in which business can comply with the various acts. Now, grade 12 learners, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is compulsory in all the acts. All the acts, they talk about the purpose. All the 8 acts, they talk about the impact. All the 8 acts, they talk about actions which are regarded as discriminatory. All 8 acts, they talk about penalties for non-compliance, ways in which business can comply. So that those aspects, you will find them in all the acts. However, some acts, they do not have the role of SITAs. When do we do the role of SITAs? We do the role of SITAs when we do the Skills Development Act. We do how SITAs are funded when we do Skills Development Act. We also do the meaning of learnerships when we do what? When we do skills development. And lastly, we do the explanation of the National Skills Development Strategy and Human Resource Development Strategy. So all these aspects should be covered when you do your Skills Development Act. It is the obligation of every business to continually upskill its employees because there are changes in business environment. So employees must have the latest skills of operating of manufacturing products. Now, let's get to the purpose of Skills Development Act. Why was Skills Development Act introduced? Now, let's look at the purposes. Now, what are the purposes of Skills Development Act? The first one is to, because here we are talking about what? Skills Development Act. That is why in the purpose of Skills Development Act, you will come across the word training, education, because now we are upskilling the know-how of employees. We are giving employees better way of doing things. We are giving them the latest skills of doing things. Now here it says, develop the skills of people in South Africa. Why? In order to improve productivity. Where does productivity takes place? It takes place in a manufacturing business. Invest in education and training. That is why I said, when you study the purpose of Skills Development Act, you will come across the words education and training. Right. Now, what is the other purpose of Skills Development Act? Is to improve the chances of job for previously disadvantaged people. Now, if people are skilled, obvious they will find jobs. Then encourage workers to participate in learning program so that they are skilled. And lastly, redress imbalances of the past. How? Through education and training. Learners, remember that all acts are there to address imbalances of the past. But the manner in which they address the imbalances of the past, it differs from one act to the other act. So it's important when you write, don't just write address imbalances of the past. No, you are going to be marked wrong, because you need to then explain how does a particular act address the imbalances of the past. Now here we are looking at what? We are looking at Skills Development Act. Then how does this act address the imbalances of the past? Through education and training. Right. I think we are getting the reason behind the purpose of Skills Development Act. So now, this act are introduced and they've got a purpose. Like I have indicated the purpose. Now the purpose then lead us to the advantages. Now let us look at the advantages of the Skills Development Act. Because in one of the purposes we said, let's just go back to the purposes, we said develop the skill of people in South Africa. Then what would then be the advantage of doing that? Hence, in our advantages, as we get into advantage, it says trained employees to improve productivity in the workplace. Because they are skilled. The more they are skilled, then they will increase productivity. Is that not an advantage to the business? It should be an advantage. Then, because people now are skilled, then it will promote self-employment and black entrepreneurship. Because people will be having a skill of dressmaking, people will be having a skill of doing different things. Some will be having a skill of repairing cars. Now that on its own will then do what? It will promote entrepreneurship and self-employment. Now, what is another advantage of Skills Development Act is that workplace is used as an active learning environment. Why learning environment? Where employees can gain practical job experience. You see how good is skills development? Of course, all acts have advantage and their disadvantages. Now, what would then be the disadvantages of the Skills Development Act? It says it increases cost as the process requires large amount of paperwork. There is a lot of administrative burden that must be done. Then it increases the cost to the business, which then becomes a what? Which then becomes a disadvantage to the business. Right, let's continue. Let's continue with our disadvantage. Implementation of the Skills Development Act can be difficult to monitor and control. So sometimes business find it very difficult to monitor and control the implementation of Skills Development Act, which then becomes a disadvantage to the business. Of course, skill development levy that should be paid, then it becomes an extra burden financially to struggling businesses. Then it's a disadvantage to business. Although the act has their advantages, it also has their disadvantages. Now, these are the things that you need to know about the Skills Development Act. Now, we're done with the disadvantages. Now, let's move to the discriminatory actions according to Skills Development Act. Now, what will then be regarded by law as discriminatory in terms of Skills Development Act? Grade 12 learners, remember these discriminatory actions may not be the same in all acts. So it's important that you know the discriminatory actions of Skills Development Act, you know the discriminatory actions of your Employment Equity Act, you know the discriminatory actions of Labor Relations Act. So as we are doing those acts, you will see the discriminatory actions according to a particular act. Now, let's take again a look at the discriminatory actions according to the Skills Development Act. Now here, remember in our advantage, we talked about learning programs. Now, what would then be a discriminatory action according to the Skills Development Act is when employer prevent employees from signing learnership. Now, signing learnership for what reason? Due to their age or position in the workplace. Then some employees would then prefer young employees to sign learnership and then prevent older employees to sign learnership. That is a discriminatory action in terms of Skills Development Act. Then the other one would be unfair promotion of skill. You see the word skill come again because we are talking about what? Skills Development Act. Unfair promotion of skills and development, training to certain employees. Now, there are employees that are preferred over other employees. Then that becomes what? A discriminatory action. Now, if we go back to the objectives of the lesson, you will realize that after discriminatory action, what follows, if I may ask? Just think about it. Think of the aspects that are said they should be covered when you do the acts, the first 5. Then that would be the what? The penalties for discriminatory action. Obvious, business will be penalized for discriminating against employees. Right, then the last discriminatory action according to the Skills Development Act is the providing or furnishing false information in a prescribed document. Because some employers, they will then say, no, we have registered all employees for learnership. Yet, they have not yet done that. Then it becomes a what? A false information provided by the employer. Now, let's see what are the penalties for discriminatory actions. Right. In terms of Skills Development Act, then how business will be penalized? Business that do not pay the skill development levy, which appeared under the what, if I may ask, under the disadvantages of Skills Development Act, may not offer learnership or rather may not claim the grant from the Skills Development Act. And then the other penalty would then be a labor inspector could order business to stop operating Why stop operating should the business be found guilty of illegal practices? So it's important that when you answer questions based on skills development, you write your answers in full so that you don't provide vague answers. I mean, if you write a labor inspector could order business to stop operating, when? So it's important that you write your responses in full. Should the business be found guilty of illegal practices? Then that's when the labor inspector could order the business to stop operating. So it's important that as you study the Skills Development Act, you are prepared to answer any question that may be asked in Section A, in Section B, in Section C. You know that your Section A is your multiple choice question, your matching item. Then your Section B, you have your source-based question where you have your scenario, your statement where you identify the act from a given scenario. Then you answer the follow-on questions. You motivate by quoting from the scenario. So it's important that as you study the Skills Development Act, you study Skills Development Act in such a way that if there's any question that may be asked, be Section A, Section B, Section C, you are able to respond to that question. Right, let's go on. Grade 12 learners. Right, this is just to show penalty for non-compliance. You see here it's an employer, then the employer has not complied with the Skills Development Act, then the employer is penalized. Now, lastly, then we need to know ways in which business can comply with the Skills Development Act, abbreviated as SDA. What is that business should do to demonstrate, to show that they are complying with the Skills Development Act? Then it says employees who collect pay as you earn should register with SITAs. And then 1% of employer payroll has to be paid over to the SITA. Now, businesses operate in different industry. Now, there are different SITAs for different industries. I will show you some examples of SITAs when we do the role of SITAs. However, for now, we are on ways business can comply with the Skills Development Act. Now, employers should submit. What is that they are submitting? Workplace skill plan and provide evidence that it was implemented. So it's important, grade 12 learners, that when you write, don't just write employer should submit work skill plan. We're not going to get full marks. It's important that you study your work, you provide your answers in detail so that you can get full marks. Then, lastly, business with more than 50 employees must appoint a skill development facilitator. Then, by so doing, what does it show? It shows that the business comply with the Skills Development Act. Now, if I may ask you, I have done the first 5 aspects of the Skills Development Act. Now, what is left that must be done under Skills Development Act? Think about it. Just give it a thought. Looking at the aspects that I have indicated to you that they must be covered when we do the Skills Development Act. Right now, we're done with ways in which business can comply. Now we get into the role of SITAs, because I've indicated to you that as you are studying the Skills Development Act, there are those aspects that you must cover. So among other things, the role of SITAs is one of the aspects that should be covered. Now, what are the role of SITAs? Remember, grade 12 learners, SITAs do not train. SITAs do not train. So please just take off that in your mind. Now, what is their role? The simple, if you look at your notes, you'll realize that your notes are so simplified. They start with points that are simple. Now, it's up to you. As you study, identify those points that you find them to be simple, and please make a point that you know those points. Like this one, report to the Director General. Is it not simple? Just to write report to the Director General. Promote and establish learnership. You see this word, learnership, comes again now that we are talking about the role of SITAs in supporting skills development. And then collect levies and pay out grants as required. Provide accreditation for skills development facilitator. What are the role of SITAs? They provide accreditation. They accredit the skills development facilitator to then say, this one does qualify to train our employees in different sectors. Then they register learnership agreements. Now, the word learnership and learning programs comes again because we talked about this concept when we were doing the purpose, the advantages and the disadvantages. Now, when you look here, you'll realize that these are different SITAs for different sectors. Now, we're not going to be asked to name this, just this is for enrichment. Right. Then I also said you also need to cover the funding of SITAs. Now, how are they funded? That is something that you also need to know. They are funded by donation and grants from public. Then there are surplus funds from government institutions that are given to SITAs. They get funds from the service they have rendered, like that one of accrediting skills development facilitators. Then they also get funds from employers. Which employers? Employers who have a salary bill that exceeds 500,000 per annum. Now, these employers, what do? They pay 1% of their annual salary as a levy. That's how the SITAs are funded. Now, this diagram, it shows how SITAs are funded. But basically, what is important is for you to know these points in terms of how SITAs are funded. Now, I also said you also need to know learnerships. But then, what about learnership? What is that you need to know about learnerships? You must know the meaning of learnerships. That's it. Know the meaning of learnership. Know what is learnership. Be able to explain, to elaborate on the meaning of learnerships. Now, let's look at the meaning of learnerships. This is a theoretical practice training opportunity that can lead to a recognized occupational qualification. Now, you can see this guy. This guy is in a practical training that would make him to get a recognized qualification. Now, you can also say it's a structured learning program that is completed during working hours for a specific period. What is learnership? It's a structured learning program that is completed during working hours for a specified period. Now, you will be given a period to complete your learnership, and that must be done when? During working hours. Right, and then you can also say it's an agreement between the learner, who is the trainee, the employer, and the training provider. So, the meaning of learnership, you do it when you do the Skills Development Act. Then, in terms of human resource development strategy, what is that you need to know? You must be able to explain, to provide an explanation of the human resource development strategy. Now, this one, when you look at it, it's more on employees. It addresses the shortage in the South African workforce. It provides human resource. Then it aims at achieving faster growth of employment levels and reduce. What is that it reduces? It reduces the level of poverty because of the faster economic growth. Then it promotes social development and helps to alleviate poverty. So, learners, when you do your Skills Development Act, make a point that you are able to explain. What is that you are explaining? You are able to explain the human resource development strategy. Basically, this will then be the purposes of the human resource development strategy that you must be able to explain. Then when you're done with explanation of the human resource development strategy, then you do the national skills development strategy. The same applies to the national skills development strategy. You must be able to provide an explanation of the purpose of the national skills development strategy. What is it there for? It is there to increase access to programs that train, because here we are talking about what? National skills development strategy. Now, its strategy is to increase the access to what? To program. Which program? That train people to better use workplace skills development, because it's a strategy. Then these are the things that the skills development strategy must do. And then I also like this one that says guide work of SITAs in the use of the National Skills Fund. Now, when you look at this aspect, you'll realize that we have covered everything that must be covered under Skills Development Act. Now, it's important that the grade 12 learners, when you study an act, know all the aspects that must be covered under that particular act. We are also going to do Labor Relations Act. We are going to do Employment Equity Act. Now, when we do those acts, it's important now as we identify those aspects that must be covered under a particular act, it's important that you start to make your comparison to say, oh, when I do how SITAs are funded, the role of SITAs, explaining the National Skills Development Strategy, and then when do I do that? When I study the Skills Development Strategy. However, there are 5 aspects that I have given to you that remain standing when you do the 8 legislation. That is the purpose, impact, actions which are regarded as discriminatory, penalties, and ways in which business can comply with the act. Now, for every act, when you're done with that act, then you need to do self-assessment. Now, we look at how questions may be asked in Skills Development Act. Remember, like I have indicated, to then say you may get a question in Section A on Skills Development Act. You may get a question in Section B on Skills Development Act. You may get a question in Section C. So teachers may ask Skills Development Act in any of their section. In your control test that you will be writing soon, you may get a question on Skills Development Act on Section A, Section B and Section C. Now, these are typical examples of questions that you may get in Section B. These are the Section B types of questions. Now, you may be required to elaborate on the meaning of learnerships. Didn't we do the meaning of learnerships? We have done the meaning of learnerships. You see, now we are asked to elaborate on the meaning of learnership. And then this elaborate on the meaning of learnership, where does it come from? It comes from the objectives of this lesson. You will remember when I was doing the objectives of the lesson with you, I said to you, you must be able to define, explain the meaning of learnership, which you may be asked to elaborate. Now, in this context, you must be able to understand what is meant by elaborate. When you elaborate, you provide a detailed answer. You go beyond explaining the answer. It means you provide all those facts which are in your notes. And then explain how SITAs are funded. Didn't we do how SITAs are funded? And then when we were doing what? When we were doing the act that we are busy with. We are busy with which act? Skills Development Act. Now, these are your direct questions. You may also get an indirect question. Now, what are your indirect questions? Your indirect questions are your source-based questions. Now, you may get a scenario wherein they require you to quote. Now, in this case, what are you quoting? You are quoting ways in which SM comply with the Skills Development Act from the scenario. Now, it means when you read the scenario, the statements in the scenario must show compliance so that you are able to quote statements that demonstrate compliance. Now, let's read the statement and check whether all of the statements do they talk to compliance in terms of Skills Development Act. Now, the first statement says the management of SSM follow rules as they have registered with SITAs. Now, going back to ways in which SITAs must comply, in which business must comply with Skills Development Act. Don't we have a point that says the business must register with relevant SITAs? Think about it, we have that point. Then, don't we have a point also that says submit the workplace skill plan? Think about it, we have that plan. Now, these two bullets, what is that they are showing? They are showing that this business, the Splendor Solar Manufacturers, complies with what? With the Skills Development Act. How? By registering with the SITAs. And then let's look at the last point. The last point in the scenario, it says employees are paid, look at this one, are paid equal for work of equal value. Think about it. Think about it, learners. Was there a point in our notes where we talked about paying equal for work of equal value? I don't remember. Therefore, this statement does not show how business can comply, especially this business. This is just a distractor. So you will only be able to answer this type of a question when you have studied and when you know all your content. So grade 12 learners, it's important that you study, and I know that you study. Right, that was another way of asking. Therefore, this statement falls off. This one falls off. Now, then we have quoted our two ways in which SSM comply with the Skills Development Act. Then this is the first point, that is the second point. Now, here it says, explain other. Now, other here refers, don't mention those ways in which the SSM complied with in terms of the Skills Development Act that are already given. You must bring others. Therefore, it means you must bring others that are in your notes because of the word other. Then describe the role of SITAs in supporting the Skills Development Act. Now, didn't we do the role of SITAs? We have done them. So this is just to show you how question may be asked. And then we have agreed to say this could be your section B questions. So there are different ways. You may be asked in section A, you may be asked in section B, so is section C. Now let's look at how questions may be asked in section C. We just getting to section C. These are our solutions to the questions that I gave you. Now, in section C, this is how a question may be asked. Remember, in section C, you do not have a scenario, but you have what? You have a preamble. So, this is what you normally get in your question paper. And then you read this preamble. Grade 12 learners, I just want to advise you to say, when you write your introduction, please do not take some facts from the preamble and make them your introduction. You're not going to be marked correct. Again, please don't take some facts from the preamble and make them your conclusion. You are not going to be marked correct. Instead, you'll just be given an R because you are repeating facts that are already given. So you must be careful. Now, let's look at the questions for our essay. This is just an example of an essay. So you may be required to outline the role of SITAs. Of course, we have done the role of SITAs in that section B question. You may be required to explain. Hence, I said when I was doing the National Skills Development Strategy, I said you must be able to explain the National Skills Development Strategy. What is it there for? The purpose of the National Skills Development Strategy. Then evaluate the impact. Now, when we evaluate here, we are looking at what? The advantage and the disadvantages of Skills Development Act on business. And then we look at ways in which business can comply with the Skills Development Act. This is just to show you how an essay question may be asked on skills development. So it's important that you know everything under skills development so that you are able to answer any question that may come. So I just want to take you through to the marking of an essay question. Now let's look at how this essay question gonna be marked. Now, for your introduction, it's important that you write the word introduction. Then when you're done writing the word introduction, then introduce your essay. Then how do you introduce your essay? Remember, I've got 4 sub questions that you can use to introduce your question. You can use any of the sub questions. You can start with the role of SITAs just to introduce your essay. We can talk about the National Skills Development Strategy to introduce your essay. We can talk about the impact of the Skills Development Act, or I can talk about compliance to introduce your essay. So it's important that as you introduce your essay, you are using those 4 subheadings, any of the 4 subheadings. For introduction, you must have 2 points. You must have 2 points for you to get 2 marks. Now, I want you to look at the introduction against the conclusion and how is the introduction marked, the allocation of marks in the introduction against the allocation of marks in the conclusion. Now, you write the word introduction, Then you introduce your essay. Then you will qualify. Let me just remove this. Thank you. Then it's gone. You write the word introduction. Then you introduce your essay with 2 statements. For doing that, you will get an L. You qualify for the first L because you have written the word introduction and you have made some facts under the word introduction. Then you qualified for the first L. Then you will ask me, we normally get 2 for L. Where's the other L? I will show you as we go on. Now, look at how the role of SITAs have been marked here. There is 2 ticks at the end. Why 2 ticks at the end? Because the action verb was outline. Outline the role of SITAs in supporting Skills Development Act. Unlike what I have asked in section B, where in section B I said describe. Now when it's described, then it's your split ticks. Now here you have your 2 ticks at the end because of the action verb outline. Therefore, for you to qualify for the full 2 marks, it's important that you give your role of SITAs in details. Are we together, grade 12 learners? We should be together. Right, then let me take you to the purpose. Then the purpose, because of the action verb, you see here it's a split tick now. Because of the action verb, it is no more outline, it's discuss. Right, then when we get to the impact, now with the impact you write positives. Either you write positives or you write the word advantage. It's up to you. You will decide. If you're comfortable with writing positives and negatives, it's okay. If you are comfortable with writing advantage, disadvantage, it's okay. Now, depending again on the action verb, that is why you don't have 2 ticks at the end. You have a split. Like when you write increase the number of skilled employees, then you get a tick. Now, increase the number of skilled employees where? In areas where there is a skill, where skills are scarce. So you must motivate the fact that you are giving. Train employees. Why? To improve productivity in the workplace. Increase global competitiveness. Now, of course, if a business has skills employees and then employees are producing products of good quality, then the business can enter into any market and sell those products because it's producing products of good quality. Then you have your disadvantages. So you must also give your disadvantages in full so that you can qualify to get your 2 marks. Then we get to ways in which business can comply with the Skills Development Act. Then we put our first A here. Why do we put our first A here? Because when you check the subtopics, there are 4. Now, the first A will be for your 4 subtopics as given in the question paper. So these are just free marks. Just for you to repeat those 4 subtopics. Then you get your first A. Then you will wonder, there is also another A here. This A, you will get it when you got more than 15 marks. You will get that A when you have more marks. Then we're done with our L. Not actually done with the L. We only have 1 L for now. We have our 2 A's. The first A is when you have the 4 subtopics And then the second one is when you have your good marks, let's say 20 and more. Of course, you will get those marks. Right, then the last one is conclusion. Now you are concluding your essay. Now when you conclude your essay, you qualify for 2 marks. Remember, I said to you, compare how introduction is marked in relation to the conclusion. Now with conclusion, it's just 2 marks or nothing. Then you write the word conclusion. After you have written the word conclusion, then what do? You conclude your essay with effect. That will then qualify you to get the 2 marks. Then when we count all our marks, we get 32. This, you will normally get it in your essay. At the end of your essay, your teachers will write this just to indicate to you, say, how many facts you obtained. And then for layout, how many marks. Is 2 why? Because there are 2 L's. For analysis, you've got your first A for the 4 subtopics, and then you've got the second mark for obtaining 32 marks and more. Then synthesis, all your facts are correct and relevant to the question asked. Then, sorry, here we don't have a mark because when we were reading this essay, there was no originality given. So this is just to show you that how questions may be asked on Skills Development Act. Now, when you look at this lesson, you'll realize that we have covered more or less everything under Skills Development Act. We simply say to you, when you study, make a point that you know everything under Skills Development Act. Then we're done with Skills Development Act. You can ask your question on our WhatsApp line 06474 88913. Now we're done with our Skills Development Act. Then we're taking another legislation. That is Labor Relations Act, abbreviated as LRA. Now, let's look at aspects that must be covered on Labor Relations Act. Remember, I said these first five aspects are common in all the legislation. However, when we get to this one, the only difference with the Skills Development Act is that Labor Relations Act also include the rights of the employer and employees. Whereas when we were doing the Skills Development Act, we did not talk about the rights of the employer and the employees. We talk about the rights of the employer and the employees when we do Labor Relations Act. Now, as we proceed with our acts, we're going to do other 2 acts where we'll also talk about the rights. But then, when we do those 2 acts, now, just think, which rights are we talking about? Are we going to talk about the rights of the employer and the employees? You will tell me when we do those acts. Right now, in terms of Labor Relations Act, then it means we need to cover about 6 aspects. Now, let's quickly run through those 6 aspects. Then, what is the purpose of Labor Relations Act? Now, learners, you can see that all the acts, they start with the purpose. Now, with your Skills Development Act, we're talking about the education and training, learning programs. Now, we have a skill now already. Now, we are talking about what? Labor Relations Act. Now, what is the relationship between the employer and the employee? Now, the purpose of Labor Relations Act is to promote collective bargaining in the workplace. Now, when you look at this picture, you will see that in the collective bargaining, you have the employees and the employer trying to negotiate in and around working conditions, salaries, any matter that relates to fair labor practice. Then it also promotes fair labor practice, like I'm saying. Now, fair labor practice between the employer and the employees, which means employer must treat employees well. And employees, in return, they must do what is expected. They must work according to their job description. That would then be a fair labor practice. Then it established. Now you see the word promote. It is used twice, but explained in different context. So the first one, promote collective bargaining, where at the workplace. The second one, promote fair labor practice. The labor practice must be done between the employer and the employee. Then the word established is used twice here, but explained differently. Now, for you, just to remember the purpose of Labor Relations Act, you can say, okay, I will talk about promote, I will talk about establish, I will talk about promote twice, to then say promote collective bargaining, promote fair labor practice, and then establish the CCMA. For what? For dispute resolution. Establish the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation, and Arbitration, known as CCMA. For what? For dispute resolution. Then it established labor courts and labor appeal courts. There are instances where a matter, it is not being resolved at CCMA. Therefore, it takes another level. And please, when we do the purposes of Labor Relations Act, don't confuse them. But then we are getting there with the grievance procedure. So remind yourself as you do the grievance procedure not to confuse the grievance procedure with the Labor Relations Act because of the word CCMA and Labor Court. Then it provides for framework structure for labor relations between the employer and the employee. You see, the word employer and employee appears many times when we deal with Labor Relations Act. Now, what is the impact of Labor Relations Act on business? Like with the Skills Development Act, we said on business. Now, with impact, I've explained it's your advantage and your disadvantage. Now, what is good about Labor Relations Act is that it promotes a healthy relationship between the employer and the employee. You can see that the word employer and employee comes again. We started from the purpose. It protects the rights of business in labor-related issues. As a business, as an employer, you have your rights. So the employees should not violate your rights, which are protected by Labor Relations Act. Is it not fair? It's a fair act. Then labor disputes are settled quickly and less expensive because of this act, because it has established a framework that must be followed when the employer and employee resolving on labor disputes. And then it provides a specific guideline for the employer on correct and fair disciplinary procedure. So here the employees, they are not going to follow any disciplinary procedure. Then the Labor Relations Act provides a guideline to say, as an employer, if the employee has misconducted him or herself, now how do you then deal with that matter? The guideline is provided. You see how good this Labor Relations Act. Of course, like I have indicated, all the acts have their disadvantages. Now, what are the disadvantages of Labor Relations Act? Now, the word cost of labor increase because of legal strike. Employer may not get a court interdict to stop strike. Now, if employees have engaged themselves in a legal strike, it is very difficult for an employer to obtain a court interdict that would then stop their employees to embark on a legal strike, then it becomes a disadvantage to the employer in terms of the production, because it lowers production. Right, those were just the disadvantages of Labor Relations Act. Like I have indicated, the first 5 aspects that need to be covered under all the acts. Then we get to the discriminatory actions according to the Labor Relations Act. Now let's see, what are the discriminatory actions. Remember when we were doing Skills Development Act, we said what are the discriminatory actions, if I may ask you. Thinking about it, okay, it's fine. Just go back to your notes and remind yourselves. Right now, in terms of the Labor Relations Act, illegal or unfair dismissal of employees is a discriminatory action. You would find that 2 employees have committed the same misconduct, but the other one is dismissed, the other one is not dismissed. Then that is an unfair and an illegal dismissal. Right, preventing employees from joining trade union of their own choice. Because as employee, they've got the right to join the trade union. You will see as we get into the rights. Right, and then refusing the establishment of workplace forum. Now, these are your discriminatory actions in terms of Labor Relations Act. You see the word trade union. Trade union. It comes again. Trade unions again. So it's important to then say, for discriminatory action, for all these legislations, for all this act, what will then be your keywords that will make you to remember your discriminatory action? So is the purpose, the impact. Now, of course, if you discriminate as a business, you will be penalized. Penalized. Now, let's look at the penalties for non-compliance. Employer may be forced to enter into a dispute resolution process, wherein other parties will sit with the employer and employees and begin to engage to hear the sides of the both parties that are involved in the dispute resolution process, wherein a decision will be taken. So a business may be fined. So please, when you are asked a question on penalties for non-compliance, please don't write business will be fined and leave it up to here. Fine for what? So it's important that you explain the context in which fine will be applied. So here business will be fined. Yes, it's a fact. They will be fined. If they fail to comply with the agreements reached during dispute resolution process that they engage them in. And then if business that fail to comply with this act may risk financial costs such as legal fees and fines. So these are penalties for non-compliance. Now that we know discriminatory action, we know penalties, then we need to advise business on how they can comply with Labor Relations Act. Now, employees should not be unfairly or illegally dismissed. Support the establishment of workplace forum. Who support in this case refers to what? Refers to the employer. Employer should not, you see the word, should not ignore any collective agreement, because in their collective bargaining, that's where they reach the agreement. So the employer should not ignore those agreements that were reached between the employer and the employees. Right, then let's look at the rights now. What are the rights of the employer and the employee? Now, grade 12 learners, you see the first 5 aspects that we did when we were doing Skills Development Act. We also covered them here in Labor Relations Act. But the difference is that now with your Labor Relations Act, we are looking at what? At the rights of the employer and then the rights of the employee. Now, when looking at this picture, there is your employer. This guy also has rights. And then you have the employees who have rights as well. So we should not abuse the act. Now, what are the rights of the employer? Employer have right to form employer organization. They've got a right to form a bargaining council for collective bargaining purposes. So those are the rights of the employer. Now let's look at the rights. Let's just take two to three rights of the employees. Employees may join trade union of their own choice. Remember when we were doing what? When we were doing actions which are regarded as discriminatory, when we were doing compliance with the act, we talked about the trade unions. Now the word trade unions come again as their right because they've got the right to join a trade union. We also talked about the strike, and then which gives, this act gives employees to embark on a legal strike. I need to underline the word legal. We don't just embark on any strike. The strike has to be legal. Then when we're doing the disadvantage, we said the employer may not get a court interdict to stop the legal strike. Then employers have got a right to refer unresolved workplace dispute to CCMA. Yet, in the purpose of Labor Relations Act, what did we say about CCMA? We said it provides for the establishment of CCMA so that employees can refer what? Unresolved workplace disputes to the structure. Right. Now, let's look at how questions may be asked. The same principle applies. For Labor Relations Act, you may be asked questions in section A, you may be asked questions in section B, you may be asked question in section C. So it's important that you know everything about Labor Relations Act. So is everything about skills development. Now, let's look at this activity 2. Let's take 2.1. Now, with 2.1, what is required? You need to outline the purpose of Labor Relations Act. Remember, I said, when you study Labor Relations Act, be any act, you start with the purpose of that act. What is the aim of the act? Why was that act introduced? So it's important that you know the purpose of all acts. Now, also the action verbs that are associated with the content. Like if I may ask again, I said which action verbs can be used to ask the purposes of Labor Relations Act? Thinking about it, you're still thinking about it. We said you may be required to outline, if not outline, discuss, if not discuss, describe. So all those are taken from where? Are taken from the objectives of the lesson. Those objectives of the lesson are derived from the examination guideline. That document, grade 12 learners, is important. Because if you can take any past paper, you can take a 2021 national paper, 2020 national paper, and then take your examination guideline and check where are questions coming from. You'll realize that some of the action verbs are used in the question paper as they are in the examination guideline. So it's important that you know examination guideline, especially the part that says learners must be able to. So it's important that when you study a particular act, you put next to yourself the examination guideline. You look at that column that says learners must be able to. Then it will tell you, especially on the acts, it will start with the purpose. So you must know the purpose, the impact, action which are regarded as discriminatory, penalties, ways in which business can comply with the act, and other additions to that particular act. Now, in this regard, we agree that the first 5 aspects are covered in all the acts. But then as we do the acts, we will realize that there are certain aspects which are not in a particular act. Like in this case, we are on Labor Relations Act. We're looking at what? We're looking at the rights of the employer and the employees. Now, this is how your question may be asked in section B, and then you can also get this type of a scenario. That's a source-based question in section B, wherein you are required. You see here, the verb has changed. With the skills development, we required you to code. Now, in this case, we require you to identify. Now, when you code, you take the statement the way it is in the scenario, and please don't change it. Don't paraphrase the statement that is given in the scenario. Take it the way it is and then write it in your answer book. Now, let's look at this scenario. Let's read the scenario together. Charmaine Bottle Suppliers, abbreviated as CBS. Maria, an employee at Charmaine Bottle Suppliers, was unfairly dismissed. Which is what? Which is action which is regarded as discriminatory. Was unfairly dismissed for late coming due to road closure because of service delivery protest. Maria had no choice but to be late because this is beyond Maria's control. But then you cannot just dismiss a person for being late for service delivery protest. What was that what Maria was supposed to do? But then finally Maria came to work. You can see that Maria was unfairly dismissed, which is therefore what? Discriminatory action. She referred the matter to the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, that is CCMA, as she was unfairly dismissed. Now, when you read this scenario, something must come into your mind. You must then start to think, which act is applicable here? Can it be Skills Development Act? Can it be Labor Relations Act? It can be Skills Development Act, but Labor Relations Act. Because now, when you see the CCMA, you start to think of Labor Relations Act, because under the purpose of Labor Relations Act, that's where we talked about, it's established the CCMA. And then under the rights of the employees, we said employees have got the right to refer unresolved dispute to CCMA. Where did we talk about those things when we were doing Labor Relations Act? Therefore, when you read the scenario, what comes into your mind is Labor Relations Act. Then you will write your Labor Relations Act. Then you motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. Why do you say it is Labor Relations Act? Then, here we say explain other action that could be regarded as discriminatory according to the Act. Of course, we have one action which is regarded as discriminatory in the scenario. This unfairly dismissed. It's a discriminatory action. Therefore, you bring others that are not in the scenario. So now, if you write unfairly dismissed, no, then you are repeating, actually you are copying from the scenario. Therefore, you are not going to get marks. Right, then you have your purposes of Labor Relations Act as it is asked. Now, let's look at 2.2.1. Because here you are required to identify the act. Yes, indeed, we have identified the act. You said it's Labor Relations Act. Then you motivate. How do you motivate? By quoting from the scenario. Now, grade 12 learners, know one thing. You are not going to be awarded marks for motivation if the act was incorrectly identified. Which means when you write SDA here, you write SDA, which is wrong. Yes, it's wrong. Therefore, automatically, your motivation will be wrong. Even if you can just take it the way it is from the scenario, you are motivating for a wrong act. So it's important that you get the act correct for you to qualify for a mark for motivation, because this motivation depends on the correct identification of the act. I hope you understand that. Just to repeat it, here I'm saying if the act is wrong, if you write SDA here, automatically your motivation falls off. Then your motivation will be wrong as well. So it's important that you get the act correct for you to get the marks for motivation. Then these other actions which are regarded as discriminatory, they are taken directly from your notes. We did not repeat those that were in the scenario. Now, if you read these discriminatory actions, you will realize that they are different from the one that is in the scenario. Right. Then we get to the last legislation for the day, which is your Employment Equity Act. Now, with this act, you know the aspects that must be covered. If I may ask you, which are aspects that must be covered? The first 5 aspects that must be covered is the purpose, the impact, actions which are regarded as discriminatory, penalties, and ways in which business can comply. So it's important that you know those 5 aspects. Now, let's look at Employment Equity Act. Now, we need to find keywords that will then make us remember the Employment Equity Act. Now, this act allows employees to do the same work and then be paid equally. You see the word equity. Then when you do this act, you're going to come across the word employment and equal opportunities, fair treatment. Those are the key words that you will be coming across as you are doing this act. Then it eliminates discrimination on the grounds of gender, race, disability in the workplace. People need to be treated equal regardless of their gender, disability, and race. Now, from the purpose, then we get to the impact of the act. Now, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of this act on business? You see the word equal comes again. Promotes equal opportunity and fair treatment in the workplace. Then, appointment processes is clearly defined so that all parties are well informed. We are talking about appointment. Why? Because we're talking about Employment Equity Act. So all appointment processes must be clearly defined so that all parties are well informed. So we need to know what appointment processes are you following. Are those appointment processes not unfair? Are those appointment processes not favorable to a certain race, and so on? Then motivate employees because every has the same employment opportunity. You see the word employment because we are talking about what? Employment Equity Act has the same employment opportunities. There is no unbalance in terms of employment opportunities. So learners, it's important that for every act, you have your keywords that will make you to remember that act. Oh, when I talk about Employment Equity Act, I will use equal opportunities, and then appointment processes are clearly defined, and then employment opportunities are the same, because we are talking about what? Employment Equity Act. Now let's get to disadvantages. Now, what are the disadvantages of this? Penalties and fines for non-compliance may be expensive for business. So sometimes diversity in the workplace may lead to conflict and unhappiness, because with this act, we said we are employing people from different background. There is diversity, but the more you bring them, it could also be the disadvantage to the business, because we have people from different backgrounds who may not be tolerant to the culture of other people. Now, what are the discriminatory actions according to this act? Not employing young people. Now, you are discriminating young women. Why? Because they may want to have children in future. So now, as a business, we are saying, no, we're not going to employ young women because they might fall pregnant, because they still want children in future, which is a discriminatory action. Now, refusing to employ people because of the strong belief in religious. Now, you are discriminating those people in terms of their religious belief. Then, what will then be penalties for non-complying with the Employment Equity Act? Now, business may face heavy fines. Heavy fines for what? For non-compliance. Please, I'm repeating again, don't just write business may face fine. Then your fine must be elaborated. What will make them to face heavy fine? The non-compliance. Right now, as you can see, you have your labor inspector. What is that the labor inspector doing? Labor inspectors may investigate by asking questions about their complaints, which now will then do what? Give business a bad image, because the labor inspectors, they are going to give a report, and a report about that business may not give a business a good image. Then you then say, this is how the business is treating employees. Right, now let's look at ways in which a business can comply with Employment Equity Act. Now, it says here, promote equal opportunities and fair treatment. Now, this equal opportunities is what we talked about when we were doing the advantages. So the word equal opportunities comes again. The word fair treatment comes again. So it's important, like I've just indicated, to then say, for each and every act, know that, okay, when I talk about the Employment Equity Act, I'll be talking about employment processes must be clear to everybody. There shouldn't be discrimination in terms of gender, race, and so on. Employees must be provided with the same equal opportunities. Now, business must guard against discriminatory appointment. You see, this word appointment comes again. So, because we're dealing with what? We're dealing with Employment Equity Act. When do you do appointments? When you employ people. When do you provide equal opportunities? You provide equal opportunities when you're dealing with people in a workplace, so that you don't provide better opportunities for male and then opportunities which are not good for female. Then that's a discrimination. Then we are no longer complying with the requirements of the Employment Equity Act. Then the other ways in which a business can comply with employment equity is by implementing affirmative action measures. Why? To redress disadvantages experienced by a designated group, and then provide a reasonable accommodation of people from designated group. So make sure that business addresses imbalances of the past in the context of a legislation that you are dealing with. Like I have indicated to say, all the legislation, they address the imbalances of the past, but the manner in which they address the imbalances of the past differs. So you can't just write address imbalances of the past. Now, let's look at an activity on Employment Equity Act. I'm repeating again, grade 12 learners, to say it's important that you know all your 8 acts. For today, we've done about 3. Then when we meet again, we will do other acts. But then it's important that for each and every act, you know the aspects that must be covered. Now, let's look at this activity. Now, this is an activity on Employment Equity Act. Now, this is just an example of an essay on Employment Equity Act. Now, I want you to look at this essay in terms of its questions and tell me, out of the aspects that must be covered when you do Employment Equity Act, what is missing? Just to remind you, remember I said when you do the act, there are 5 common aspects that must be covered. Let's just repeat them, all of us. Number 1 is the purpose. Second one is the impact. Then third one, action which are regarded as discriminatory. The fourth one is penalties for non-compliance. And the fifth one is ways in which business can comply with the Act. B, Skills Development Act, Labor Relations Act, Employment Equity Act. Now, I want us to look at this typical example of an essay, and then you will tell me what is missing in terms of the 5 aspects that should be covered in terms of Employment Equity Act. Fine. Number 1, okay? It says outline the purpose of Employment Equity Act. This is 1. Then we've got 1. Then discuss the impact. Yes, is 2. We've covered 2. Advise business on consequences, penalties that they may face for not complying. Then is 3. Then suggest practical ways in which business can comply with the Act. Then is 4. Then there's an aspect that is missing. Think about it and tell me that aspect is it. You can see this Act, it has covered almost all the 5 aspects, but there is one that is missing. Let's look at them again. 1 is the purpose, fine. The impact, 2. And then advise business on the penalties for facing. Now, what would then lead you to penalties? Because you cannot be penalized if you are complying with the Act. Then it means there is something that this business did not do. Hence, it will be penalized. Now, what is missing is actions which are regarded. Let me just do this. Let me just do this for you. Right, we said this is 1, and then this is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. Then what is missing is actions which are regarded as discriminatory. Now you can see that this essay, it has almost covered all the aspects that must be done in terms of Employment Equity Act. Therefore, Employment Equity Act, it is not like your Skills Development Act. It is not like your Labor Relations Act. So it has covered almost all the aspects. This brings us to the end of our lesson.